A fundraiser in Connecticut last night. President Biden made some of his most candid comments yet about former President Trump's criminal conviction. In off-camera remarks, Biden told the audience that a convicted felon is now seeking the office of the presidency. The president added, quote, "As disturbing as that is, more damaging is the all-out assault Donald Trump is making on the American system of justice." President Biden is reported to have said, quote, "Something snapped in this guy after the 2020 election," and, quote, "It's literally driving him crazy." Biden went on to call Trump unhinged, Joe. So maybe a private preview, Joe, of where we may see President Biden going publicly as his campaign rolls out now that Donald Trump has been convicted on 34 felony counts.
Right, it is, Jonathan Mira. It may be a private preview, but this is how Biden feels. This is how his campaign team feels. This is how people around him feel. They are glad the trial's over. They're glad that he's going out on the trail. And as I said yesterday, while that long stem winder of a press conference was going on Friday, the Biden campaign was celebrating. They said, okay, he sounds older, more unhinged, less connected with reality. This is why we want him out of the courthouse and on the campaign trail.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but they're exactly right. Some senior Biden people were eager for the trial to end because they felt in some ways it shielded Donald Trump from the scrutiny of the rest of the voters when then they actually hear him talking again. And he's in their living room again, which he was in that news conference on Friday, which he will be in the debate in just a few weeks' time. Americans will be repulsed when they don't want to go back to that Trump term. In terms of how the president and his team are going to handle this, it was previewed to me a couple of weeks ago. As we saw last week, President Biden's first words about the verdict were simply, we need to respect the process. The judicial system worked, and attacks against it are disgraceful. But now we're seeing other Democrats and the president himself begin to ramp up his attacks on Donald Trump. The Biden Twitter account more than a dozen times yesterday used the phrase convicted felon. We heard it again from President Biden last night. Now, they don't believe this conviction itself is a race-changing event. They do think, though, it will help along the margins and in a close race. That could matter. But more than that, they think it's just the latest piece, Willie, of this overall example they're building about how Donald Trump isn't fit for office. Look at the lengths he would go to keep power. Look how he's only out for himself and not you, the American voter.
Yeah, and given that this came in late May, this verdict, we'll see how long it can burn through a long campaign, whether it stays alive as a conversation piece. And Molly, you're writing about this in Vanity Fair. Molly's latest piece is titled Trump World's Post-Conviction Spin Cycle. In it, Molly writes this: while many Trump surrogates appeared to go about their messaging in lockstep, there were also some rather stark inconsistencies, suggesting Trump's verdict was not something that Republicans had a clear handle on. Perhaps the weirdest display of dissonance came from Mike Lee, who quite simply could not seem to make up his mind on whether the trial was a boon or a bust. At 5:15 p.m. on Thursday, the Utah senator tweeted that by pushing for and securing Trump's conviction, progressives have, quote, guaranteed Trump's election. But a mere 20 minutes later, the senator appeared to turn on a dime, saying of the trial, I can't imagine a bigger, more impactful contribution to the Biden campaign. A jury has found Trump to be guilty on 34 counts of falsifying business records. In his world, this reality does not really matter. It's something that can be endlessly spun and mangled and perverted into a word salad of projection and lies. But when it comes to wiping off a stain that is this indelible, Trump world is going to have a much harder time, writes Molly Jong-Fast. Molly, let you expand on this a little bit on your piece. But obviously we heard reflexive reaction from most Republicans, not surprising at all, given a lot of them were at the courthouse during the trial to support him, saying that this was a miscarriage of justice and the criminal justice system is broken and the country is terrible and all those things because one time it cut against them. How do you expect this to play, though, for the rest of the campaign?
So it reminded me a little bit of the Access Hollywood tape. Like there was a moment of panic. It wasn't quiet. When the Access Hollywood tape broke, there was sort of silence and everyone was like, are we going to stick around with this guy? Obviously, Republicans are in it too deep to do anything but keep going. I mean, Donald Trump is basically the central platform of their 2024 campaigns. down the ticket. So I don't think that they're going to cut and run from him. And in fact, we saw lots of defending, but we saw a kind of very weird defending, right? So they would defend some things, but not other things. They attacked the rule of law, which is what we were expecting. I mean, a lot of it was this playbook, but there certainly was some tacking and weaving. And I also think ultimately Donald Trump is, when they're not completely in lockstep, that's something to look at. And so I do think there were some problems there. Ultimately, Trump was always going to say that this is what he expected and that this was how he thought it would go. But I think they really did think that he was going to skate, or at least skate on some of the charges.
Yeah, I mean, and they wouldn't have been alone. I was sure that there would be a possibility of a hung jury. Sure that maybe there would be one person out of the 77 million who voted for Donald Trump in 2020 that was on that jury that would not take their duty seriously. What I was wrong, and the Trump campaign was wrong. There were 12 jurors who were willing to set aside all pre-existing beliefs, all pre-existing prejudices, and just look at the facts of the case, follow the jury instructions, and convict him on 34 counts. Now, Gene Robinson, you're saying that there's something Donald Trump could do if he really wanted to make America great again, and there's about as much chance of him doing that as the Tories winning in a landslide next month. Why don't you tell us what he could do?
Well, no, he could withdraw from the race because he's just been convicted of 34 felonies. Imagine, Joe, if this were any other point in American history from the founding of the Republic till the day in 2015 that Donald Trump rode down that escalator at Trump Tower. At any other moment in our history, a candidate for any office who was convicted mid-campaign of 34 felony charges would have been out of the race before the jury foreman finished reading the 34 guilty verdicts, right? I mean, it would have just been automatic. It would have been unthinkable that someone would stay in any race given the status as a 34 times felon. But again, we're in this very different world. I thought, as I was sitting down to write a column yesterday, I thought, well, look, somebody needs to call for Donald Trump to step out of the race because, all these sort of, hand-wringing Democrats and chin-stroking pundits they've been calling for Joe Biden to step aside, and the only thing he's guilty of is living to 81. It's just, it's just this weird, topsy-turvy, upside-down world that we live in, and we need to stop every once in a while and realize this is not normal. This is not healthy. This is insane. And I kind of wonder if maybe that will sink in, just that fact of how insane and unacceptable this is, will sink in with some voters over time. We'll see.
I suspect it may with swing voters. We saw some polls over the weekend suggesting that it just may do that with independent voters, with swing voters, especially in the upper Midwest states. But Gene brings up such a great point, Willie. In the good old days, back when I was in Washington, I mean, heck, if somebody got indicted of 34 counts, they immediately resigned from Congress and went to prepare their defense. Here, Donald Trump gets convicted 34 times, 34 different felonies, and of course you have United States senators who are trying to use it as a badge of honor that their guy is being persecuted by the state.
Yeah, I mean, he's martyrdom, right? I mean, he's been compared to religious figures without irony by members of the United States Congress, by people on TV as a rallying cry behind him. And that's the Trump way, though, isn't it? Never surrender, never apologize for anything. Put your head down and keep moving and pretend, despite all the facts around you, that you are the victim.
And Always play the victim. I mean, that's
Yes.
always play the victim, always play the martyr. You know, he was asked in this weekend Fox and Friends interview about evangelical supporting him. We even saw people that used to be. I just saw shocking things by evangelical so-called leaders. One of them having Trump next to Jesus on a cross, saying, why wouldn't you vote for somebody who's been convicted? You worship somebody who was convicted. And that shows you just the depravity that many of these people are willing to sink to. It's just straight out blasphemy.
I was just going to say, there used to be a word for that, blasphemy. But Molly, the point of all this is that Donald Trump could not pull this off alone, right? He would be a convicted felon, and he would sound as insane as he does sound in that interview with Fox and Friends over the weekend for 90 minutes or however long it lasted. But the entire party, the entire media on his side rallies behind him and legitimizes his claims of victimhood.
And what was interesting this whole weekend was that the message out of Trump world was, this helps him. Right. We raised Gonzo money. Again, we're going to have to wait to see the filings, but it's still a lot of money either way. And he said, you know, this helps him. This makes him more powerful. You libs have done it now. Right. Even though, remember, it's a state case. And the other thing is that this doesn't exist in a vacuum. He has 3 other cases, plus all of these civil cases. I mean, this isn't just like one rogue prosecutor. I mean, the guy has done all of these things, which have led to all these investigations. So, look, I think that to watch Trump world pump him up, both to try to play him as the victim and to also say that he must stay in because he is the only way that they're going to survive is a bizarre thing.
You know, there is such a bubble, too, Jonathan Lemire, that these people live in. I mean, and even people in sort of the media orbit that I've talked to, they think 34 felony convictions is great for Donald Trump, great for fundraising, firing up the base. Man, people are going to do whatever it takes to vote. It fires up his 44%, his 43%, you know, and ceiling maybe 46, 47%. But you know, they actually believe it. Trump knows better than to believe that this is something that he wants. But there are people around him that have convinced themselves, living in the bubble, that these 34 felony convictions, the greatest political advance for Trump in some time, and they're just completely delusional.
I mean, they're right that it'll fire up the base. They're right that it'll be good for fundraising, at least for the time being. But there's a couple of things here. First, we do know, as we've long said on this show, the way to know what Donald Trump's actually thinking is what he posts on Truth Social in the middle of the night. And it has been screed after screed after screed expressing anger and frustration at what has happened in these legal cases. And also, I've talked to people around him. He doesn't want to go to prison. He didn't want to be convicted. They had convinced themselves they would at least get a hung jury. They were surprised by the verdict, and particularly that it was unanimous. But even if this does help politically with his base, there's simply no way it helps beyond that. Now, Democrats feel there's worries already about complacency, that the members of the base will say, well, Trump's been convicted. He can't win. No. And that's why the overarching message from the Biden campaign immediately was he can still win, conviction or not. We've got to get out there and beat him at the ballot box. But it's about those swing voters. And in particular, as someone in the Biden camp put it to me yesterday, the people who are going to decide this election, the suburban voters, some of them older voters, they care about a couple things. And they care about democracy and they care about decorum. And they're just sort of turned off by the idea, the Biden people believe, that Donald Trump not only is now indeed a convicted felon, but the other part of that Fox interview over the weekend, Willie, was that he threatened retribution. Yeah. He said, we're going to use the Department of Justice to get back at the people who did this to me. And that, I think, is going to be upsetting to a lot of voters who are going to cast their ballots and actually decide this thing in November.
Yeah, kind of confirmed everything people believed about what's going to happen. I'm going to fire all the generals. I'm going to put in MAGA. We're going to have our own people in there. We're going to get rid of effectively the federal government and replace it with our own.
I know that you've said before that you've been sustained by the prayers of lots of Americans. I've seen pictures of people praying over you.
It's incredible, actually.
Her question is, she says, you've been faced with so much adversity and persecution for years. What's your relationship with God like, and how do you pray? That's Sharon from Alabama.
Okay, so I think it's good. I do very well with the evangelicals. I love the evangelicals. And I have more people saying they pray for me. I can't even believe it. And they are so committed, and they're so believing. They say, "Sir, you're going to be okay. I pray for you every night." I mean, everybody, almost, I can't say everybody, but almost everybody that sees me, they say it.
I'm sorry. I mean, seriously. Just go to church once, right?
Once.
Just like get the crib notes, all right?
Yeah.
Right. So just like I can write it out for you in an index card, okay? I'll just write it out for you in an index card. When somebody asks you what your relationship is God, don't go, well, evangelicals vote for me. They say, "Sir, we vote for you." I mean, that's I'm not sure where in the Sermon on the Mount Jesus said that. It's certainly not in the Beatitudes, but this is also, he was asked in 2016, does he pray to God to ask for forgiveness? He said, "Well, I've never done anything that I've had to ask God for forgiveness." So I did. So Willie, I find it fascinating. He won't answer that question. He didn't answer that question about a relationship with God, and he's still, as far as prayer life goes, again, he says he's got no need to pray because he's perfect. He's asked about both of those things, and he goes, "Well, evangelicals like me," and they say, "Sir, it is just a parody," and for people to, he's a man of God, he's Jesus, He's Jesus in flesh. It is really, and again, I mean, comparing him to Jesus Christ on the cross, which some evangelical so-called leaders did, it's just beyond parody. It is sad.
He's got somebody who follows him around with a printer because he likes physical printouts. Someone could just print him a couple of verses. He's been in politics now for almost 10 years and just memorize like 2 of them. And you can just spit those out every time you're asked about religion. Instead, he said the following, quote, "Religion is such a great thing." That was his summary of his faith in that interview.
Yeah.
So, George, we're learning more about those 4 hostages that mentioned by Raf, Nadav Popplewell, Amiram Cooper, Yoram Metzger, and Chaim Perry, all kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. Their bodies still are in Gaza. Nadav Popplewell was 51 years old. He had been kidnapped with his mother from their home. His mother, Hannah Perry, was among those released in November. Popplewell was seen just a few weeks ago in a Hamas propaganda video. His kibbutz described him as a sensitive and quiet individual, a gifted computer expert. Amiram Cooper was 84 years old, one of the founders of the kibbutz Nir Oz. He was an economist, poet, and composer. He leaves behind his wife, 3 children, and 9 grandchildren. 80-year-old Chaim Perry was described as a man of peace, art, and cinema. Perry was a teacher and the founder of the Nir Oz Art Gallery. He leaves behind a wife, 5 children, and 13 grandchildren. And Yoram Metzger was known for his storytelling and his humor. He helped to establish the Nir Oz Winery. Metzger was 80 years old. Join us now, former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for being with us today. I want to start with the hostages and just the gut-wrenching news that 4 more hostages are, through intelligence, the IDF believes to be dead. Still, their remains are in Gaza. And 2 80-year-olds, an 84-year-old, one of them protecting his family in a safe room when he was ripped away from his family. Some of their wives were also taken hostages but released. But now we know they are dead. What can you say about the continued effort, the very difficult effort, obviously, to get the hostages home?
Well, there's 120 hostages, of which, unfortunately, there's 41 confirmed dead or to be murdered. by Hamas. We're dealing with the most genocidal terror jihadist organization on earth, and they, are cynical. Will execute our people, and the bottom line is that we can't allow Hamas to stand. We can't have them exist at the end of this war.
Even in this latest ceasefire proposal, which we'll get into, Israel has said, we'll stop shooting if you release the hostages. So do you have any hope that Hamas would listen to that?
I think the only way to release the hostages is if Yahya Sinwar, the commander of Hamas, and the leadership of Hamas know that their hours are over and that we're minutes away from killing them and destroying that leadership. And then the deal needs to be, we will not kill you, we'll allow you to get on a boat and get out of Gaza if you release the hostages. I think the half-hearted efforts or conducting of the war right now by the Israeli government, coupled with the American administration slowing down IDF all the time, I think that is self-defeating, because the faster we move in, the quicker we'll have a deal.
When you say half-hearted, you have said we should have been talking about the IDF. When I say we should have been inside Rafah months ago.
That's right. I think there's way too much talk. We're going to do Rafah, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Just do it. Just do it. We can destroy Hamas, and we can make that one offer to them. We will allow you to live, but expel you from Gaza if you release the hostages. Right now, Yahya Sinwar is playing a cat and mouse tactic with us, just biding time, because the overall strategy right now of Iran, of Hamas, of Hezbollah is to exhaust Israel. Just last night, Hezbollah shot dozens and dozens of rockets on the Galilee. The Galilee is burning. Almost 100,000 people have been evacuated from their homes. Imagine if in El Paso, Texas, there were 100,000 people living now 8 months in hotels or motels because their homes are burning. That's what we're facing. We have no choice. We have to win.
Joe has a question for you, Mr. Prime Minister. Joe?
Yeah, Mr. Prime Minister, what's been your response? What's your reaction to families of hostages saying the Netanyahu government hasn't done enough to focus on bringing those hostages home?
Well, when I give interviews abroad, I typically don't criticize my own government. I think that the efforts have been feeble in terms of focusing on Yahya Sinwar. You can't conduct a war turning it on and off like a light switch. I was a soldier, I was a commander. If we just have several weeks to go in with all the force necessary and tell Yahya Sinwar the only way you'll live is if you raise a white flag and release the hostages, we can get this done. But we keep on wavering, vacillating on this. This is not how you can bring results.
So it's your opinion that actually a full-scale invasion of Rafah would bring the hostages home more quickly?
Look, yes, obviously there's no guarantee here. It's a heart-wrenching situation. I think that the current approach of thinking that we can reach this amazing deal where all the hostages will be released, I think it's naive. And it means that you don't understand what we're dealing with. And the only way that we get results is if they understand their time is out. And I want to say one last thing. We sealed the corridor called the Rafah corridor that basically is the border between Sinai and Gaza, which means that from about a week ago, Hamas can no longer replenish its arms, so time is running out for them. People are not aware of this. So if we just follow through, I think we can get the best results possible.
Let's talk about the quote destruction of Hamas, a phrase that's been thrown around a good bit. Is that the killing of all of Hamas leaders, or is that the expulsion of Hamas from Gaza as an effective governing force? Because I believe the Biden plan does say that part of that plan expels Hamas from Gaza as a governing force.
The latter. What I would envision is the leadership of Hamas, either we take them out and kill them, as we've done to several. Or similar to Beirut of 1982, we get them on a ship, several thousand of the leadership of Hamas, get them out, and then we can begin the rebuilding of a new Gaza and build a new future for everyone.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, let's talk about this deal that President Biden unveiled publicly on Friday. He framed it as the Israeli deal. This is something that he said the government had agreed to, but we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu say, well, no, not quite. Can you explain the disconnect?
Well, there is a degree of disconnect. The bottom line, though, I think it's moot, because I don't think there is a deal. I think it's an illusion. I don't think Yihya Sinwar will release the hostages. He might release several of them to dangle and bide his time, but he's playing around with us. There's no reason to believe that he would release the biggest asset that he's acquired unless he sees his death coming.
So U.S. officials say, though, they're saying that part of the divide here was the agreement that the Israeli military would withdraw from Gaza. Is that something that the government would consider?
Look, I read the press and I heard that Netanyahu offered that sort of thing. I think that we have to retain the Rafah corridor, the Netzarim corridor. Otherwise, what we'll see is a very rapid rebuilding of Hamas, and we'll see another October 7th, perhaps in 2025 or 2026. And they won't release the hostages. They may release a few hostages, because they've got 120 of them. They're not going to release all the hostages. No way, unless he sees tanks coming over. That's the only option that'll bring that result. I know this guy.
Well, that's the leverage he has, is holding the hostages.
Yes, and the leverage
loses it.
Exactly, but the leverage we need to create is an imminent and immediate threat on his life and the lives of leadership. And it's not, if we just follow through and stop this vacillation, we can do it. I fought Hamas, I fought Hezbollah. It was many years. We can do this. This is not the most complicated thing on earth. And by the way, we're doing it with very low civilian casualties right now. We managed to move about 1 million citizens away from harm's way, contrary to what was being told to us that we can't do it. It would take months. It took about 10 days.
Despite your best efforts to spare civilians, as you know, Hamas uses civilians as human shields. We know all that. Just last week, there was the attack on a tent camp, an explosion that ensued. 45 people were killed in grisly pictures. As a commander, should more care be taken, as someone who was a commander, more care be taken to avoid the civilian casualties on the merits of not killing women and children, of course, but also the way it turns public opinion against Israel?
Well, I want to correct you. We did not attack the tent camp. We attacked and took out 2 leaders with a very precision weapons.
But it killed 45
No,
other people.
it did not kill. What happened was those people were hiding within ammunition, and that ammunition that Hamas cynically placed under them, RPGs and explosive, they exploded. It was a secondary explosion. So essentially, Hamas murdered its own people. Let's be very clear.
But that's just the point. Hamas hides behind civilians. So how do you, if you're going after Hamas, how do you avoid civilians?
If Hamas is determined to kill its own people, there's nothing I can do to stop it. We cannot prevent Hamas from killing its own people. Just yesterday, let me tell you a story. In one of the houses, under the bed of a 10-year-old girl in Gaza, there was a ammunition depot with RPGs and explosives. There's no way in the world that we can prevent Hamas from killing its own people, and it wants to do that because it knows you're going to ask me those questions, and it applies pressure on Israel. The way to do away with it is if everyone pressures Hamas and not Israel and points the finger at Hamas. Stop killing your own people. Stop hiding explosives under civilians.
Joe?
Mr. Prime Minister, let me ask you, first of all, about the state that we find ourselves in right now. We have both, I'm sure you know this or else you wouldn't come on the program, we have been extraordinarily critical of Hamas and have said from the very beginning that when they kill a Jew, that's good news. When a Palestinian is killed, that's great news for Hamas. We certainly understand that equation. We also understand the terrible, terrible toll it's taken on the Gazan people and also on Israel's reputation across the globe. I want to ask you about where we are right now, though. It seems to be the worst of all worlds. where the IDF is frozen in place. Gazans are starving. Gazans are not getting the medical care they need. It's almost like a siege. And it seems to be the worst of all worlds. Is that one of the reasons why you're saying the IDF needs to be able to go into Rafah and finish off Hamas, finish this war off, and start the rebuilding?
Precisely. It's you take off a Band-Aid quickly. You don't do it slowly. And you can't fight a war with an on and off button. You just can't. I was a fighter, and it's impossible. When you hit your enemy, Hamas, you punch him in the face and he's wobbling. What you do not do is tell him, take a month off, get better, come back and fight another day. And this lack of continuity, lack of determination, coupled with American pressure on us to go slower, is a mistake. This could have been over 3-4 months ago if we just followed through. I think both governments are not conducting themselves in an optimal way.
What does Gaza look like in your eyes after Hamas is expelled, after hopefully the hostages are released, after there's some semblance of control? Do you believe that the Israelis should take control of Gaza, or do you believe in the possibility of an international peacekeeping force with the United States and your Arab neighbors?
Well, I'd envision the model of post-World War II Germany, where the first phase is, first of all, defeating the Nazis, and we've not yet finished that. Then I would put in place an interim appointed government of competent Egyptians primarily, Palestinians, Saudis, Emirates, while Israel retains the security responsibility. We don't want to govern Gaza. There's no desire, so in that sense, it's simple. This would go on several years. It could be 5-6 years, in which period we'd also discontinue the incitement. So they'd have to stop teaching kids that Jews are pigs, etc. Stop it in the media, stop it in the mosques. And within 6, 7, 8 years, we see how it develops, then we could hand over to self-governance. We do not want to govern Gaza. We have no desire whatsoever for anything from Gaza. For heaven's sakes, we pulled out of Gaza in 2005. We handed it over to the Palestinians. So there's no territorial fight here. We have a terror state that wants to destroy Israel, and we don't want to be destroyed.
Do you see any third party, any outside force? Is it Qatar, for example, who could apply any pressure on Hamas to release the hostages, to accept some kind of deal?
I think Qatar could do much more. I think Qatar is playing a very dirty game, a double-faced game. They pretend to be a Western and an advanced country, but they in many ways are helping, together with Iran, to foster terror for many years. Yeah, they could pressure Hamas for the simple reason that right now the Hamas leadership is living in hotels in Doha, Qatar, and they could tell them, look, if you don't get the hostages released, we'll kick you out, and let's see you live in Damascus or Tehran, which is not as pleasant.
By the way, President Biden spoke to the Emir of Qatar yesterday with a similar message.
This Emir and the Qataris have blood on their hands.
Former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Mr. Prime Minister, thanks for being here today. We appreciate it. Dr. Anthony Fauci was grilled by Republican lawmakers yesterday in a combative hearing about the origins of COVID-19. NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson has more from Capitol Hill.
Dr. Anthony Fauci on defense.
When you're dealing with a new outbreak, things change.
And dismissing claims he played any part in a suggested cover-up of COVID origins.
The accusation being circulated is absolutely false and simply preposterous.
The doctor, who retired 18 months ago, back in the spotlight as part of a Republican-led investigation into the pandemic's origins and response. A hearing at times turning testy.
Mr. Fauci, because you're not doctor, that man does not deserve to have a license. As a matter of fact, it should be revoked, and he belongs in prison.
Suspend.
Fauci explaining what he meant when he testified behind closed doors in January that the 6-foot social distancing rule sort of just appeared, according to transcripts, now clarifying it came from the CDC with no clinical trials done.
You didn't feel an obligation as the lead scientist at the NIH to challenge that. I've challenged the CDC multiple times.
Fauci served in his government role since 1984, advising 7 presidents of both parties, and was a prominent expert in the fight against diseases like HIV/AIDS. Back when COVID started spreading, he became the pandemic's public face, appearing in briefings, in magazines.
Here's Dr. Anthony Fauci.
On late-night shows. But since then, he's become politically polarizing, alternately idolized or demonized. Overnight, Fauci saying the vitriol he faces, including on Capitol Hill, means he still gets death threats, even while out of government service.
You have performances like that unusual performance by Marjorie Taylor Greene in today's hearing. Those are the kind of things that drive up the death threats.
Testifying emotionally now about the death threats his family has faced.
It is very troublesome to me. It is much more troublesome because they've involved my wife and my 3 daughters.
At these moments, how do you feel?
Terrible.
That was NBC's Hallie Jackson reporting. Willie, it really is. It's extraordinary that they've taken a man who's committed his life to public service and tried to demonize him over masks. You know, the guy's yelling, why didn't you do clinical trials like on masks and 6-foot distances? We were in the middle of a pandemic that would kill millions of people. They didn't know. They had to do best efforts at the time. You're going to do a clinic. Do you think that guy and his family would have volunteered for a clinical trial saying, we're going to try 1 feet. We're going to try 2 feet. No. They were doing the best they could. Vaccines. They were trying to figure out, is this going to be like past vaccines where it creates smart cells that actually can stay with you for 10, 15, 17 years? They didn't know. We've now found out afterwards you have to have a booster, maybe every 6 months. Maybe it's going to be after a year. It is, again, it's what generals call the fog of war. They were in the middle of a war that killed millions of people, and they were doing the best they could do. Whenever they made mistakes, it seemed to me they made mistakes by acting like they were more certain about things than they actually were. But again, they were doing the best with the facts that they had before them, and I find it hard to believe that anybody would deny that reality unless they were trying to win cheap political points.
Yeah, and that's what it is. He's become a villain in certain circles, Dr. Fauci, despite his decades of service under presidents, Republican and Democratic, as Hallie just said in her piece. And also, we should point out, led by former President Trump, this country got to a vaccine in record speed and saved untold numbers of lives. Dr. Fauci was there. Operation Warp Speed under President Trump helped get us across the finish line. They never mention that part of it as they object to the 6 feet apart. And of course, there are things in hindsight that weren't right, that were established at the beginning. Kids should have been back in school sooner. We know all of that now, and we learn from it for, God forbid, the next time. But it's easy now from the cheap seats years later to make those charges and accusations against Dr. Fauci. Joining us now, one of the men in the room yesterday, Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California. Congressman, thanks for being here. Take us inside that hearing room yesterday. What was it like?
I mean, honestly, it was completely shameful. I think one of the absolute worst things that I've seen in Congress, I mean, Dr. Fauci is an American hero. We should all remember what was actually happening during that period of time. And there were some days we were losing over 4,000, 5,000 people a day in this country. We were washing our groceries as they were coming in. We were separating and distancing seniors. The tragedy that was happening in our nursing homes. I personally lost both my mom and my stepdad to the pandemic. She was a healthcare worker. And so this attack on Dr. Fauci, I mean, not even giving him the respect of calling him a doctor was insane. And this whole idea, I mean, that we're going to attack someone that was leading a group of the most brilliant medical minds in the country and the world to develop a vaccine that saved millions of more lives is something that should be a complete embarrassment to the Congress. And of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene just led that insanity and shamefulness.
Hey, Congressman, I knew that about your mother and your stepdad, and I'm so sorry. I know this was personal for you yesterday. We heard accusations that Dr. Fauci suppressed curiosity about the lab leak theory in China, that perhaps it wasn't animal-born. What's your assessment of that debate?
Dr. Fauci has been completely transparent. He's been clear that there's a lot of things that we're exploring. He has not ruled anything out. Could it have been a lab leak? Could it have been an animal-to-animal transmission? We just don't have complete evidence to know at this moment. But what he's not going to do is rule anything out. What he's also not going to do is kind of entertain these conspiracy theories. We had members of the Republicans on the committee insinuating that Dr. Fauci was covering up the origins, that he was somehow involved in creating COVID, that he somehow parachuted into the CIA headquarters for secret meetings. I mean, this is the kind of insanity that is happening right now in the Congress. And I take a real issue with the leadership of the Republican House putting someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene on a committee, a select committee that's supposed to be looking at the pandemic, on how we prepare for the next pandemic, knowing how completely unserious she is. She set up this whole committee for complete failure. There's a lot we could be doing. How do we reopen schools faster? How do we better deal with businesses? How do we make vaccines better? These are real questions that we're actually not working on in this Congress.
Well, and one thing that came out yesterday regarding the lab leak theory was when someone approached him in 2020 and said they believed that perhaps they needed to look more closely at the lab leak theory and thought that it may have been, in fact, a lab leak theory. There was an email that was presented yesterday in your hearing where Dr. Fauci said, well, if you have evidence of that and if you believe that, please report it to the FBI immediately. Does that sound like somebody who is trying to cover up the possibility of a lab leak, saying, if you believe that, get your information to the FBI now. They need to see it.
I mean, absolutely right. I mean, Dr. Fauci has served presidents of both parties. He is a committed, dedicated public servant. And again, he led a team of the world's best and brightest to save millions of lives around the world. In the United States, we lost over 1 million Americans. We lost over 7 million people around the world. We were having 9/11-like death events every single day. This was a horrific tragedy, the single largest loss of life event we've had in the modern era. And Republicans want to play politics by attacking this man. And it's completely shameful, and we should be embarrassed of it. And so I'm glad he came. I'm glad he stood up to them. He said the truth. And it's important for all of us to continue to support truth, science, and facts, and not these conspiracy theories that Marjorie Taylor Greene and so many others are putting out there in the community.
Hey, Congressman, lastly, we want to turn you to a different subject, that of immigration. Later today, President Biden is going to announce executive orders, effectively gives the ability to shut down the border with Mexico, really restrict asylum. Let's get your reaction to that, sir.
Sure. Well, look, we haven't seen actually the final proposal yet. So, without knowing exactly what's in it, I'll say, broadly speaking, I think we understand that President Biden, on his very first day in office, actually submitted a comprehensive immigration reform bill, one that would include not just border security provisions, but also pathways to citizenship and ways to fix the legal asylum system. Republicans have absolutely done nothing to actually bring that issue up or to actually give a hearing to some of President Biden's other proposals. We can all agree, Democrats and Republicans, that there are serious challenges along the border. I think we can all understand that. We also know that we need to fix the asylum system. We have to provide more resources. We need more asylum judges. And so I think the president is doing the best that he can under essentially having no support from the Republican Party on either the security piece or on the piece of actually being a humane country. I immigrated to the United States when I was a young kid. I am an immigrant from an immigrant family. It is completely shameful that we turned our backs on immigration and having a humane and orderly border and process in this country. And so we'll see what the president has to say. I'm still very hopeful that this Congress needs to address broader immigration reform and create pathways for the 10 million plus people in this country that don't know what their future is going to be like.
We should get more details later today from the president when he signs that order. Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California. Congressman, thanks for your time this morning. We appreciate it. 2 years after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, a new book is shedding light on conservatives' years-long strategy that finally led to the Dobbs decision. The book is titled The Fall of Roe, The Rise of a New America. It explores how the right's most fervent anti-abortion activists end up persuading the court to end nearly 50 years of precedent. Joining us now, the book's co-authors, national religion correspondent for the New York Times, Elizabeth Dias, and national political correspondent for the New York Times, Lisa Lerer. Good morning to you both. Congratulations. Today is Pub Day.
Today is Pub Day.
Congratulations.
Pub Day. Thank you.
Your baby is out into the world.
It
Here we go.
It is. It's here.
Deeply reported, like 350 interviews. You really get into the history of this issue. So it's a lot to get through, but I guess I'll start at the end, which is how the dam ultimately broke after this half-century effort to overturn Roe versus Wade. Donald Trump getting in the White House obviously put those 3 justices on the Supreme Court. But at the end, what happened that pushed it over the finish line?
So our book is really the first narrative of how Roe fell. And what we did was look at the final decade of what we call the Roe era. And what we saw in this period is this tightly connected web of conservative anti-abortion activists were able to move the levers of power in their favor in ways big and really small, working at state houses to start pushing through legislation. And then, as you point out, Donald Trump gets elected. They get really, they jump on that train. It becomes a bullet train for them. And they get really lucky. They get those 3 seats on the Supreme Court. And they're dealing with an abortion rights movement that's really ill-equipped and unprepared to take on this threat. And a country that really has this pervasive sense of denial that this right that's been part of American life for 2 generations could suddenly disappear.
So, Elizabeth, Donald Trump, obviously, evangelicals were skeptical of him in 2015, even in 2016. He had talked about being pro-choice many times in public previous to that. And then maybe ultimately they realized they can perhaps shape him a little bit because he so desperately wants to be elected that they can dictate what they want from him.
They did. And one of the really interesting things we found, too, is it wasn't just evangelicals, right? That actually Catholics played a really important role in the anti-abortion movement's growth, origins. Evangelicals were actually late coming to that in history. And the leaders of the anti-abortion movement actually really were rooted in their conservative Christian values about family, womanhood, and of course, abortion. And what our story shows is that it was those values that really were behind the move. I mean, certainly, as Lisa was saying, there's all these levers of power that they pulled. But at its core, this is all happening over a period when America is becoming increasingly secular. There's so much cultural change, especially when it comes to marriage, family, and sex. And these are the things that the anti-abortion movement ultimately is hoping to change, right? It's not just about overturning Roe. It's about a much bigger half-century plan to really roll back the sexual revolution.
Joe, you've watched this so closely from the point of view of faith, but also through politics over the course of your life and your career, culminating once Donald Trump is in the White House with 50 years of precedent overturned.
Right. 50 years of precedent overturned. And Elizabeth, you are right. Catholics have been pro-life for quite some time. As I always joke on this show, evangelicals, my church, Southern Baptists, were pro-choice from the time of Jesus' birth until the Eagles broke up. When you say a new America, I think it's interesting. It was a new Republican Party and the redefinition by political activists in 1979, 1980, what it meant to be an evangelical, what it meant to be a Christian. And you had people like Paul Weyrich and, Richard Viguerie and Jerry Falwell just deciding whole cloth, this is how we beat a Southern Baptist Democrat. So I'm curious, how did their political machinations in 1979 and 1980 not only change American politics, but based on your reporting, how did it change how evangelicals looked at their own faith and bringing in this political controversy that many now put at the center of their faith?
Well, look, you could think about politics influencing religion or religion influencing politics. And the story that we've been really seeing, you guys have been talking about on this show for so long, is in the Trump era, especially in this last decade, we're really seeing the merging of those two things and politics influencing religion. And, you know, you can think back to this very long game, the anti-abortion movement. Conservative Christians think in generations about change. It's not just a political cycle. But also the people that you mentioned, right, that's a couple generations ago. And what our book talks about is there was actually this most recent generation that actually got overturning Roe over the finish line was really led by conservative Christian women. And they have a vision of what it means to be a woman in America, how motherhood fits into that really changed the game in the end. And it's not just the story of kind of the 80s religious right. There's a modern religious right that is enormously influential. And it's not just on issues about abortion, it's issues, all kinds of cultural issues in this whole realm about rolling back the sexual revolution.